Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm joined today by author Barbara McHugh. Welcome.
Hi, good to see you.
I'm so glad you're here.
How's my
Barbara McHugh is a poet, novelist, and professional editor. She has a master's in English literature from NYU and a PhD in religion and literature from the University of California at Berkeley and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Barbara has been studying Buddhism and practicing meditation for decades. Her debut novel is Bride of the Buddha, which is what we're going to talk about today. So please tell me about Bride of the Buddha. Tell me about your debut novel.
Okay, The Bride of the Buddha is the story of Yasodhara, the wife of the Buddha, and he abandoned his wife to go off and seek enlightenment. He abandoned his wife and 2-day-old son. But in my novel, she has her own spiritual journey. It begins in her childhood and eventually leads to her disguising herself, disguising her gender to join the Buddha's all-male monastic community. And she becomes the Buddha's closest confidant, known in the scriptures, a historical figure as Ananda. And Ananda is the monk who persuaded the Buddha to allow women to join the order. So he's a historically very important character, or should I say she?
What a compelling tale, and what a fascinating glimpse at a piece of history, and perhaps a little told piece of history, telling it from the woman's perspective. So, can you tell me a little bit more about when you were first interested in learning more about Yasodhara, and how did that curiosity become this novel?
Well, I mean, I think it started slowly. I mean, so many women I knew were sort of turned off by this guy who left his wife to seek enlightenment. Why should I become a Buddhist? And I had that feeling myself. I was a little uncomfortable with it. So I wanted to find out, who is Yasodhara? What is the wife? What's her point of view? What's going on here? Why did the Buddha do this thing? And that was really what got me going in terms of wanting to find out what the value of the myth was. Why is it necessary to have the story of the Buddha leaving his wife? And I came to the conclusion that actually it is, because the Buddha, the basic myth of the Buddha is that he has this perfect worldly life that his father set up for him so that he wouldn't go off to be a holy man. And so he fixed, and in the myth, which is not historically true, he's a prince in a palace. And his father wants him to become a king and not to become a holy man, but a prophet told him, the father, you're either going to get a king or a holy man, one of the two. And so the father decided, okay, I'm going to really perk up the palaces. We're not going to have any mention of death or sickness or old age. It will be forbidden in this kingdom. And so the Buddha had everything he wanted in his life, women and a lovely wife. And he had a beautiful marriage, and then in a patriarchy, the best thing possible, a baby son. Then the question becomes, why would you want to leave this kind of life? Well, because at age 29, right after the baby son was born, or perhaps shortly before it, as in my novels before it, the Buddha does run into these things. The sick man, the corpse, this old man, and then he runs into a holy man. So he realizes the devastation he feels at this introduction of the truth of death and suffering be solved. And I think the reason why the myth is powerful is because his basic insight is suffering is unavoidable in this life, no matter how great a life you had. And he had the best life possible. So makes sense for the myth to have some powerful. That's why they put him in a palace, even though in fact he was probably the son of a clan leader. Not a bad life. I mean, he was certainly well off, but not as hugely monumentally royal and special. But anyway, so he had this perfect life that he abandoned. But I still was nagged by the feeling of Yasodhara. I mean, here's this abandoned wife. What's she supposed to be? What's she supposed to do? So I started to research this, and it became compelling to me to want to write the story. not only to show the Buddha as with human choices rather than just these sort of empty mythological choices, but to show what happened with her. The gender switch came later when I was in the process of writing it and when I was doing my research. And at first, I did not want to write a gender switch novel. No, I'm writing a feminist novel, women's point of view. I can't do this. Everyone's going to dump on me. And a few people did dump on me. But I had to do it. It was so compelling because Ananda's story was so compelling. And so I don't know if I should just ramble on about Ananda a little.
Well, yeah, you're kind of anticipating my next question, which is about these questions of gender and patriarchy, which, as you have foreshadowed, are really major elements of this story. So I would love to hear more about your exploration of that history and how it came to be in the novel. And, if you found that there were some echoes that you noticed in your day-to-day life in our modern society.
Well, certainly there are echoes of patriarchy in day-to-day life. But to start at the beginning, Ananda was known, and this is in Pali. I used the Pali canon a lot, the earliest Buddhist scriptures, and they were discourses the Buddha passed along orally, and they were passed along for 500 years after his death before they were written down. And he died. The traditional date is 483 BCE, and they were not written down until the 1st century BC. So there's a long time there where they were passed along. And of course, the monks, after he died, had to decide, well, what are we going to write? So there are a lot of discrepancies and mysteries in the Pali Canon themselves, although the descriptions of the Dharma, the nuts and bolts Dharma, how to do it, how to train your mind, are very amazingly consistent and gender-free, which is one of the things that appeals to me about Buddhism. The core of Buddhism has nothing to do with how you act as a man or a woman or blah, blah, blah. But Ananda was their stories as well as these instructions on how to train your mind in the Pali Canon. And Ananda is described as a monk who supported women in many ways. And he was the monk who talked the Buddha into admitting women. So that was interesting to me. But what was interesting when I discovered he was an unenlightened monk that talked the Buddha, who was by then the Buddha, into doing this, making a major change. And why would this junior monk have so much power over the Buddha? And then my other question is, why wasn't Ananda enlightened? Back in those days, everybody was enlightened. A lot of the Buddha's closest associates were enlightened. In fact, he even had one monk who had been a mass killer, and he got enlightened after coming to the Sangha. So why was one of his closest associates, and later his confidant, why did Ananda never get enlightened until after the Buddha's death? So I was sort of like, these two questions just compelled me. And I realized the one explanation for these anomalies were, hey, Yasodhara and Ananda were the same person. And living a life of deception would mean she couldn't become enlightened until she dealt with that, until that was resolved. So that's sort of how it got going. And I kept saying, no, I can't do it, but I must do it. And so I did do it. And then Ananda also represents, this comes back to a lot of the basic conflict of the novel in some ways. The core conflict of the novel is this conflict between personal love and love of the world versus transcending the world. And in the Sangha, in the Sangha community, the Buddhist community, Ananda very often represented kind, loving aspect of Buddhism. And then there are all the ascetics who represent the other side, the transcendent people. They have their point, and they make their point. But there was a struggle in the earliest days, and it persists in Buddhism today. There's how much are we supposed to be an engaged Buddhist? Most of the people in the West, especially in California, are very pro-engaged Buddhism, social action, and very close to the church that I go to. I mean, they all read the same Mary Oliver poems, and they all do make the same contributions to the same politicians, et cetera, et cetera. But there are also Buddhists who say, no, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be transforming ourselves, and in that way, the world will be transformed. But the point is, you go beyond that. So that was one of the things I really had worked out in drama in my book. I mean, how this, for one thing, Yasodhara has a relationship with her son. And her son is a monk in the Sangha. How does she have a relationship with him? How does she transcend her mother's love? And how does she conceal it? So there are a lot of problems that arise for her and questions that make her, why am I doing this type thing? So for me, it was just very fruitful. And as far as what this means in my life, well, I guess what it means in my day-to-day life is that I am caught up in this struggle between how much to commit myself to personal transcendence or commit myself to social action. And for me, I have a quote that the only quote that resolves it for me is, wisdom tells me that I am nothing. Love tells me that I am everything. My life is a river that flows between the two. In other words, for me personally, I can't make that decision on one way or the other. I have to live day by day and struggle. I mean, as an unenlightened person, I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe when I become enlightened, I'm sure we'll all become clear. But
and I want to talk to you when that happens. Yes, we'll definitely have to have another conversation. Indeed, indeed. And you're right, it's like certainly like a fascinating conflict in the novel. It's certainly a fascinating conflict for all of us humans. I love that quote, that river between wisdom and love. And you're right, like sometimes we veer towards one side, sometimes we veer towards the other, but they're both true in their contradiction, right? So that's an incredibly beautiful and powerful quote. And you also mentioned that you are part of a church, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So you're part of a Christian church, and you've been practicing meditation for decades. Can you tell me a little bit more about that intersection and how that plays out for you?
Okay, well, I'll start by saying I definitely didn't grow up with a whole lot of Christian baggage, because I grew up more with Christian warfare. My father was an agnostic Catholic who believed that Catholics were the only true church, nonetheless, even though he didn't believe in God. And my mother, I don't think I ever heard her say Catholic without saying damn Catholic. She thought they were like, horrible withered arm worshiping, the awful relics. She was totally creeped out by Catholicism. And so I grew up a little skeptical, but I always felt pulled toward Jesus and that, the act of selflessness and escaping the confines of the self and being loving. So I was compelled by that Christian method. And grew up in the tradition as we all did. I mean, in this country. I mean, it's just, even if you're not a Christian, the Judeo-Christian tradition is alive for most people and becomes part of our psyche. So, and then I went to graduate school along the line when I was out trying to figure out who I was and what my spirituality was. And my roommate turned out to be a minister in training, and she one day, many years later, became the head minister of the Berkeley church that I belonged to. And I hadn't been to church in a long time, but I thought, wow, this is my old roommate. I want to go. And she was a real charismatic person and enjoyed her services. So I started going to her church. And it's just the personal relationships and the personal friendships and the sense of community really drew me in. I have a friend in that church who's also very much interested in Eastern spirituality, more on the Hindu side, and she calls herself a non-theist Christian. And I thought, yeah, that's a good thing to. I can go with that. Sometimes I call myself a non-theist theist, because occasionally it's sort of nice to have a sense of God, or say a prayer here or now. When someone, especially when someone I know wants to be prayed for, I'll pray for them. I mean, so I do feel that that's the ananda side of the kind loving kindness is worked out more in Christianity in some ways. I mean, there is that side in Buddhism very, very, very strongly, but Christianity in a way has a corner on the idea of the poor and serving the poor. And for me, I don't know if it's old hippie or what, but to me that's very, very important. And poverty and and the issues we have in this country, racism. And I'm glad Buddhism is addressing them, but I really see a lot of power. But I see the power in Buddhism in training the mind. And yes, in Christianity, there are ways of training the mind, but Buddhism, wow, you really do it. So the two of them together for me, I mean, I can't see my life uh, with getting rid of either of them. Oh, I mean, I think I'm stronger on the Buddhist part, but Christianity and Jesus, very important to me.
That's
And
a
just the
really,
community, the people that.
yeah, it's a wonderful description.
In
And
fact,
go ahead.
when I first went to the church, started attending this church, and they also had a really good musical program at the time. And I had this little slogan to myself: come for the music and stay for the old people, because they had this community of people over 85 that were just awesome. But now I'm approaching this. I think I'll never live up to what they were, but it was just amazing. And so that was another thing that pulled me in, just that particular community and how really committed people are to serving. You know.
That's so lovely. And the way you described it, they sound so complementary too, right? That I feel like so often we want to put things in either or boxes when there's space for both and there's space for both and so I feel like your description of that just summed that up so beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and yet, as you know, you come up against the contradictions at times, and then you just deal with it, whatever, however it is, So, but yeah, they are complementary, absolutely, So,
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that brings me to my last question for you, which is after reading Bride of the Buddha, what do you hope readers will walk away with?
well, I hope in some appreciation of the Dharma. I hope just that how I've been able to express it. Uh, of new ways, new possibilities of seeing, relating to men, women, nature. So that's what I think any good fiction does. It gives you the sense of new possibilities, a way of, breaking the barriers of the self, expanding, and I hope to do that sort of in a general sense. Also, the idea of, giving the female point of view. I mean, so many women are doing this now. They're writing these novels, plays, or whatever, with the females at the center. And I really want to give people, women in particular, the confidence to be able to say, I'm a person. Before I'm a woman, I'm a person. Before your gender can characterize you, it doesn't have to define you. No matter what gender you are, intersex, asex, and to give that sense of, so that when you think of person, you don't automatically think of a man. You don't automatically, any more than you should automatically think of a white person. Or, it's like, there's got to be this sense of personhood that goes beyond that. Maybe even goes beyond the physical body, and really get that sense. So I hope to give people a sense of that, what it is to be a person or what it is to be enlightened. And even though I'm not, you have your moments. I've used those moments in the novel. I mean, I needed my practice to write this novel, and I sort of like, and in a sense, an act of faith was to write, scenes with the Buddha in it. Who am I to write a scene with the Buddha? Eek. But, I did it. So I apologize to whoever needs to be apologized to.
Well, and know that I'm sending tons of gratitude because you're right. Like, what an act of bravery to write a novel with the Buddha in it. And thank you. Thank you for engaging your faith to create this book. Everyone watching, please do grab yourself a copy of Bride of the Buddha. And Barbara McHugh, thank you. Thank you so much for writing it. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Well, thank you for talking to me. You're so enthusiastic. And especially as I say, to see someone enthusiastic about novel writing and fiction and what it can do for you, Hooray. Thank
Oh, my pleasure. And we are a whole community. Everybody watching, feels that deep love of books. So you're welcome to the community. You're now in the fold.
you.